27 years ago, if you told a younger version of me, aged 13, that today I would do a job where I speak to people all day, I run a podcast, which is a de facto monologue radio service, I would have said, nah, I think you've got the wrong person. I think you've got the wrong man. When I was 13 in school, I always used to be fairly confident in school. I liked to participate. I liked to raise my hand. When I was around 13, I had a teacher called Mrs. A. Mrs. A was the smallest teacher in the school with the biggest voice and the most fearsome reputation. Not a lady to be trifled with. And I used to sit in Mrs. A's French class while she spoke only in French, mildly terrified that she was going to pick on me or ask me a question. It was a bit of a nerve-wracking experience. On one Tuesday morning, it was a nice sunny day, and I used to sit directly in her eye line. And she'd look up and she'd go, "Robert, please read from the textbook in page 24. Obviously in French, not in English. And I opened page 24, and the first paragraph began, "Ce matin, blah, 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 blah." And I went to say "ce matin," and I couldn't get the words out. And I felt this sinking feeling fall to the pit of my stomach, as I knew that I wasn't going to be able to say the words. And there was a sort of hiss of laughter around the classroom, and then this long, awkward silence. And I looked up at Mrs. A, and she looked at me with a kindly but crestfallen face. And she asked me again to read from page 24. And I tried to say "ce matin" again, and I stuttered over the word "ce." I couldn't form the sound, I couldn't make the sound. And I just sat there, looking down at the page. And eventually she went and picked someone else to read the paragraph. After that class, it was break or recess, and I went out on the yard, and a friend came up to me and said, "That was very clever, that, Rob, pretending to stammer so you didn't have to read." And I was like, yeah, that's what happens, sure. But overnight it transformed me. I went from being someone who was happy to participate in class, happy to raise my hand, happy to spend a few minutes reading from a book, to being someone that never raised my hand, never participated, used to dread being asked to read from textbooks. I've always liked storytelling, and I've always been a good student of literature. I think English literature was perhaps my favourite subject at the time. And it went from being my favourite subject to being my most terrifying subject. I stopped being interested so much in the stories that we were studying and spent all of my time in class worrying about, was I going to be able to get to the end of the class without being asked to read and without anyone discovering I was a fraud? I must have slipped up at some point and said something that sounded good, because later that year I was asked to participate. I was selected as one of two students from the class to participate in a school elocution competition. And on the inside I was like, shit, I can't go. The days to this class eventually ticked around. And I'm sorry to say now that I chose to go and hide out on the yard. I just didn't show up. I maintain now, all these years later, that not going to the elocution competition was the right thing to do. I think it would have damaged me further. I went about it all wrong. I should have told someone that I needed help. After all, in my family, I later found out that my mum used to stammer at school. My mum's brother, my Uncle Dave, used to stammer at school. My granddad did stammer, and I knew about that. My sister used to stammer. So this used to run in the family, so it was no major surprise, really. I had all of these people around me that could have helped, that would have understood, that maybe had already lived through this once. And I just kept it to myself. I held it in my body. I completely tensed up. I closed up and tensed up. A year down the line, I've no longer got Mrs. A as my French teacher. I've now got Mrs. C. And near the start of year 9, Mrs. C says, "Right, boys," obviously in French, because it's always in French. "Right, boys, I would like you to prepare a radio show." And I'm thinking, oh no, not a radio show. And in groups of us, we have to go away and prepare a short radio show that she's going to record on a tape recorder. This is back in the 90s, so tape recorders were a big thing. And we go and prepare this radio show, and we work out who's going to say what. And I've got about 30 seconds of speech. And I'm there the night before, looking at these words, pinpointing which words, which sounds I'm going to be able to say, and which ones I don't think I can say. which sounds, which J's and C's or whatever sounds are going to trip me up. And I'm thinking, oh no. I come into school the next day, and of course French is the last class of the day. So I've got all day to stew on this and think about it. I'm watching the clock tick around hour by hour towards doom time, where I'm going to have to do the radio show, and everyone again is going to discover that I'm a fraud that can't talk. Not only is French the last class of the day, but we're the last group to present our radio show. I go up, I'm second to talk out of our group of 4, and I managed to get through it. I've got no idea afterwards what I've said, but I get to the end, and I've never felt more relieved to get to the end of my section. I go and sit down, and my arm's shaking. The next day in French class, we get to listen to what we've done. And eventually she plays our group's radio show, and it gets to my section, and I hear a voice that sounds nothing like how I imagine I sound in my head. I hear someone who's speaking too quickly, but I hear a resonance about the voice, a certainty about the voice that I didn't feel on the inside when I was talking. And I was like, oh, is that what I sound like? I had no idea. So it was all about perception. It was about my inner perception, my outer perception. Because the stammering incident is what I call my wounding event. And the wounding event in storytelling terms leads to what becomes the lie. The lie is something about you that you tell yourself that sabotages you, that holds you back, that keeps you trapped, that keeps you small. And everyone has a wounding event in their story. And that's the topic of today's episode, is the first of our core story prompts, which is the wounding event. The reason that I've started with the wounding event is because it mirrors what in the hero's journey gets termed the call. It mirrors the call. It's the inciting incident across your life that means that you as the protagonist, you as the hero, cannot continue on your same trajectory. You're forced into a challenge. I believe now that the work that we do seeks to answer certain questions, that we all have a certain question at the heart of our work. I don't think we get to choose those questions. They're either baked into us or given to us by a higher power or the universe. Or sometimes I think they just emerge out of life experience, or perhaps some combination of the three. But I think there's some question, something that we keep coming back to in our work to try and solve, to try and fix, to try and work on. So is it a coincidence that my work today is about clear communication? It could be, but I think there's maybe something in it. So we're going to explore the wounding event today. As always on the show, we're going to cover 3 ideas. The 3 ideas are the 5-second moments. The second idea is the lie. And the third idea is the resolution. So let's go ahead and have a look at the first idea. In his book Storyworthy, Matthew Dicks describes every great story as being characterised by a central 5-second moment of character change, where the character arc completes, the internal change is complete in the protagonist, and the story can move towards its outcome or resolution. I really like the idea of 5-second moments, and it's something that we'll come back to in a couple of episodes' time when we look at self-understanding or the central crisis. Because Matthew Dix is really talking about the moments that facilitates the outcome of the story. And this is going to be a theme that's going to run across this series, is that you might want to pinpoint a 5-second moment in your story where everything changed for you. But I actually think that the 5-second moment applies just as well to the wounding event at the start of your journey, at the outset of your journey, and the chain of events that have led you to where you are today, as it does to the key insights or the self-understanding. And the thing about the 5-second moments is that 5 seconds, when you tell it in present tense and tell it slowly and bring your readers or your listeners into the details of the story, 5 seconds can last quite a long time. If you think back to the story I told you at the outset of this episode, the 5-second moment was sitting in Mrs. A's class on a bright, sunny Tuesday morning, and I'm sitting directly under her eyeline, and she says to me, "Robert, please read from the textbook on page 24. There's a few things about the way I told that part of the story. Firstly, you've got dialogue. Dialogue also helps to bring people into this second-by-second moment. So 5-second moment was where I stammered, trying to say sematam. My heart or my core being sunk into the bottom of my stomach. I had this sinking feeling and this knowledge of certainty that I wasn't going to be able to say the words. So in thinking about your wounding events, it's worth thinking about, well, what 5-second moment first comes to mind? If I'd recorded this episode a few years ago, I might have fairly confidently told you that I didn't really have any obvious trauma in my childhood. I had a mostly happy childhood. Happy home, my parents are still together, even today. A loving, supporting family, nice group of friends, nice enough school. Nothing really bad happened to me. No one died that was close to me. And yet, there's always something. Because life is not this plain sailing series of events that we rationalise it to be after the fact. Especially if we're trying to paint if we're kind of used to people asking us how we are and we're saying, yeah, we're fine, even when you're not fine. It's thinking about the times and picking a moment when you were not fine, where life threw some challenges up in your face. And it doesn't matter how insignificant those challenges might seem to other people. Me stammering in French class, okay, it's not the best thing in the world to happen to someone. But it's also not like anyone died. No one died in the making of this story, I'm pleased to report. In that 5-second moment, it was still traumatic. It was still meaningful to me. I still felt like in those seconds that my world had ended. It mattered to me, and that's all that matters. So the wounding events, I'm just thinking across some of the clients that I've worked with in recent times. Some of my clients have really obvious wounding events. Maybe the passing of a parent or someone that they were close to, or some other major trauma that was fairly obvious. And then they spend their lives since recovering from that, integrating the lessons from that. A mentor of mine has been recently saying that everything that shows up on the screen of your life is a gift in some way. I struggle with this a bit, but I kind of buy into the premise that, yeah, I think on some level everything perhaps is a gift. You know, if I think about my daughter, she's 5. She was born with something called hemiplegic cerebral palsy, which means that she doesn't use the left side of her body that much. It probably happened during birth. She was born 8 weeks premature, and we think it happened during birth, that she had a bit of minorish brain damage. And it means that she'll never do some of the things that I like to do. She'll never be an athlete. She'll never run. She can run, but she'll never be a runner. And yet, Rumour is perhaps the most determined person I've ever met in my life. And I have every confidence and every faith that that determination will take her a long way. Maybe her struggling more with the left side of her body. Perhaps it will encourage her to be more determined. You know, perhaps in some regards it is a gift. It's a fairly sort of deep opening prompt, this one. But I'm asking you to think back through your life, and in particular through your adolescent years. The wounding event could be a more recent one, but it's nearly always something that happened as you were growing up. It could even be something that happened before you were born. I do think that trauma can be inherited across generations. It could be something that happened to your parents or grandparents even. If we go back far enough, unfortunately, every family has a war story. I only recently found out about mine, which is a story for another day. But it could be something that happened to you, like my daughter Ruma. It could be something that happened to you during birth. Both of my kids were born premature. Both of them spent the first weeks of their lives in an incubator, in the neonatal intensive care units. Trauma can start there, even if we don't remember it, and it drives behaviour going forwards. I believe that very firmly. So in the 5-second moments, ideally it should be something that you can remember. If there's honestly nothing you can think of, and you had a dreamy childhood where nothing came to challenge you ever, firstly, I don't really buy it. I think you haven't really dug hard enough. But if that's the case, there might be something further back from around the time that you were born, or even before you were born. There might be something further back. But in thinking about traumatic events, I want to come back to the fact that it doesn't have to be a life and death situation. It could be a group of friends who were not nice to you at school. It could have been something that you had to do but didn't want to do. I still maintain that grammar schools in the UK tend to bully their pupils by making them play rugby union in winter when it's 2 degrees outside. And you've got some sadistic PE teacher who loves mud and wants you to play in the semi-dark. So it could be something like that. But rather than just playing rugby or a few friends that were not nice to you over a longish period of time, think about one singular moment, one 5-second moment. Because I honestly believe that we remember the stories we remember for a reason. Out of everything that's ever happened to you, of every single day of your life, we only remember a small sliver of the events that have happened to us. If you remember a 5-second moment from a particular situation, it's because it taught you something, or it meant something. So don't dismiss anything that comes up. That's the first thing, is thinking about other traumatic events that might have started the chain of events to where you are today. What was one 5-second moment? Don't overthink it, just make a note of the first thing that comes to mind. The second idea I want to talk to you as it relates to the wounding events is the lie. And this is directly taken from storytelling theory, where in every great story, every hero is in some way flawed. And if you pay attention to most Disney movies, the main protagonist is usually lacking one or more parents. They've had some kind of trauma at birth. Mowgli has been abandoned away from the man village and he's fallen off a boat, and he's saved by Akela and the wolf pack. That initial trauma leads to a mental narrative, a mental script that you tell yourself about yourself called the lie. And the lie is the thing that you have to overcome. It's the character arc of your story. So the character arc is the internal change that you go through from the start of your core story sequence to the end. So what the wounding event does is it sets the lie in motion. So for me, the lie was that I'm not eloquent, I can't talk, and then by extenuation, I don't have anything worth saying. No one wants to hear me. That was the lie that I started to tell myself. And it took me a long time. It took me quite a lot of semi-successful attempts at public speaking to really unpick the lie and get to the bottom of it and realise that what I want to be, I'm actually very eloquent when I want to be. And it took me a long time to like and respect the sound of my own voice again, and even to like hearing the sound of my own voice. So there's quite powerful stuff in the lie. Great lie will never fully leave you, I believe. So if something happens in childhood and the lie gets set in motion and it becomes embedded and entrenched, and then throughout your life you've perhaps unpicked it or largely unpicked it, But it's probably still there today, running in the background as a background program. It's there spinning away in the background underneath the surface, perhaps guiding decisions in a way that you don't realize or don't acknowledge or don't really think about. And that's what a good lie does. When you pinpointed the right lie, it's one that never fully leaves you. In some ways you conquer it, you get over it, you transcend it, you become a bigger person, but you only become a bigger person out of transcending it, because in some regards it's still there in the background. It's a scar in the background that you've got. It's a battle scar on the journey of life. And that's what we're looking for in the lie. So the second question is, out of your wounding event, out of your 5-second moments, what was the lie that you told yourself that you may still be telling yourself today in some slight way? The third idea to talk about then is the resolution. So in telling your wounding event story, you don't want it to be all doom and gloom, because it is quite a dark story prompt in many regards. We're kind of going into the shadow, if you like, rather than telling stories about the happy, joyful stuff. We're getting raw and real straight away and very quickly. In many regards, you are opening a vein and bleeding a little and showing people the real you. However, you do want to finish the story on the resolution. If you think right back to the start of the episode and me stammering in French, there's actually 3 sections of the story. There's me stammering, there's the 5-second moment in Mrs. A's class. There's the school elocution competition, which was almost like my false start, if you like, of like the story presented a possible resolution to me, but I wasn't yet ready to accept it. I wasn't yet ready for the character change wasn't complete at that point. So the story presented an opportunity to resolve, but I wasn't there yet. I wasn't able to take part in that competition. So that's why it was there in the story. The third part of the story then is the radio show that I prepare in Mrs. C's class a year later, where really I'm still in the thick of the trauma. I'm there fretting in any class at school where I might be asked to present or to read from a textbook. And I spent a bit of time talking about my anguish on that, and my internal. It was really a story about internal conflict, and I told you about how I'd pick out all of the sounds that I felt I'd be able to say and which ones I thought I wouldn't be able to say. I was trying to let you into my head on that point. But the story does resolve. The story does eventually have a happy ending in some regards, because I survived my radio show presentation against all odds. I survived. But then I'm surprised the next day when I hear the story back. I'm surprised at this relatively confident sounding voice that is obviously me, but isn't how I imagine me in my head. And I ended the story on perception. So perception was then the gateway. But it's the one idea how I would bridge that story to my message, where you're telling you're telling your story to influence people's perception of you. So then perception could be how I connect the story to the message. We'll talk about the one idea in a future episode, but you always want to end the story on the same idea that you bridge into your content or your sales message or your pitch. But the idea I want to get across to you today is that in thinking about your wounding event story, it can't just be doom and gloom. There has to be some kind of outcome, some kind of positive resolution, even if that resolution isn't complete. So me successfully presenting that radio show, it wasn't a complete resolution. It wasn't like my stammer was fixed, because it, as I've said, it never is fixed. It's still there today. It's still there. There's a small part of my brain that's saying, this could be the day. This could be the day when the stammer comes back and you're live on your own podcast and you can't talk and they're going to find out you're a fraud. There's still a little voice in my head that's still doing that. But I've learned to become a bigger person, I think, because of it. And in that regard, it's a gift. So you do want to end the telling of your wounding event story on at least a partial resolution. And again, you're just showing people that you struggled with this thing, you overcame it. This was the lesson it taught you, and it began a chain of events that have led you to where you are today. The second step in that chain of events is going to be what I call the false start story, and we're going to cover that in next week's episode. Let's just do a quick recap. Today's episode has been about the first of my core story hero's journey sequence prompts called the wounding event. The wounding event is characterized by a single 5-second moment from your past where in many regards your world changed or felt like it ended in that moment. It could have been something that happened to you. It could even be something that happened further in the past. Maybe when you were born, maybe even before you were born. But ideally, it should be something that happened to you in adolescence. What the wounding event does is it generates the lie. The lie is a mental narrative or a mental script that you told yourself, or perhaps in some regards you continue to tell yourself, that kept you trapped, kept you safe. That's what the lie does. Is it tries to keep you safe, but it kept you small. It prevented you from becoming the fullest version of you. The third idea that we looked at then was the resolution, was making sure that there's an element in your story where you either do overcome the lie and address it, or you begin to do so. There's some event that shows you in the cold light of day that it is a lie, that it's not true, that you're bigger than this, that you're better than it. So what was that resolution event? That's the place to leave your wounding event story. What else is going on in my world? As I record this, we're at the start of 2026. It is the 4th of January. Very cold here, but very sunny. What do I do in sunny weather? I try to get outside, but the ground is frozen, so there's no barefoot running at the moment. I am planning more runs though later this year, so hopefully there will be more running stories to regale you with. Probably with more running trauma, I would have thought. So all of that is coming. For me, really, at the moment, it's a period of reflection, a period of planning, a period of preparing what I'm going to do for this year. So I've spent the last week or two consolidating. I switched my website branding from being the Story Selling Lab to being a more personal domain, storyrob.com. The thinking behind that was because I wanted a single domain to house all of my work, rather than having different websites and different locations for different things. So I've still got a few microsites dotted about, but StoryRob will cover everything in one place. Thank you for listening to this episode about the wounding events. We'll pick up next time about Core Story Prompt 2, which is the full start. So I'll speak to you then. If you found this episode of Story Systems helpful, you'll want to make sure you're on my email list. I'll send you a copy of my lead incubator system blueprint and also my top 5 core story prompts for entrepreneurs. Head to storyrob.com/podcast. You can also find my book by searching on Amazon for Simple Story Selling. See you next time.